The sharp chime of a temple bell echoed through the mountains as the sky burned gold with the last light of dusk. A lone figure stood still, his robes trembling in the cold wind, eyes locked on a flame flickering atop an ancient altar. Tenzin, a 32-year-old monk, once known for his arrogance and anger, now wore the silence like a second skin. The fire's reflection danced in his eyes, revealing the storm raging within. He whispered, "Is this all I am now? A shadow among stone?" The wind answered with a mournful howl. Behind him ruins sprawled, a once glorious monastery now crumbled by time and fire. He had returned after 7 years, but not for redemption. Something had called him, something deeper than memory, more haunting than guilt. Tenzin's breath shook as he took a step forward. The silver star, long believed lost in war and betrayal, was said to reside within the monastery's hidden sanctum. A relic of immense power, or an illusion born of regret. The path to it began here, but the price was unknown. Tenzin knew only this. To uncover the secret, he must confront the one thing he had buried long ago, himself. The echo of the past was louder than the wind as Tenzin stepped across shattered stones. Each footfall stirred memories buried in the dust. "This is where I lied," he muttered, eyes scanning a cracked wall bearing the ancient script he once vowed to protect. A child once ran here, laughing. That child had grown into a man who betrayed sacred vows. The weight of it pulled at his shoulders. A gust blew open a splintered door, revealing the once sacred meditation chamber. Inside, silence pressed like gravity. He knelt, his hand trembling as it touched the cold floor. A prayer, half-remembered, slipped from his lips. Om Mani Padme Hum. The words cracked like glass. He had not spoken them in years. Tears welled, not from pain, but from the distance between who he was and who he had become. Shadows danced on the wall, echoing the flicker of guilt within. He didn't yet seek forgiveness, only understanding. But in that sacred silence, the past whispered its answer: "You have not been forgotten, only awaited." In the corner of the chamber lay a broken mala, prayer beads charred and half buried in ash. Tenzin picked it up with reverence, the scent of old incense rising from the wood. It had belonged to Master Dorje, the only one who saw potential in him. The old monk had died in this very room, shielding sacred texts during the attack. "I ran," Tenzin said aloud, voice shaking. "I let you die." The mala snapped in his hand, beads spilling like tears across the stone. Silence didn't accuse him, it mourned with him. The shadows lengthened, flickering as if stirred by spirits unseen. In that moment, something shifted within. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the first crack in the wall he had built around his soul. He stood slowly, and as he did, a faint glimmer caught his eye. A piece of parchment, hidden beneath the altar stone, untouched by time. He reached for it, unsure if he sought redemption or just proof he hadn't imagined it all. The parchment crackled as he unfolded it, revealing faded ink drawn with sacred care. A map, half burned, but clear enough to reveal a hidden chamber beneath the ruins, marked with the symbol of the silver star. His breath caught. The stories were true. His hands trembled, but not from fear. This was a sign, not of destiny, but of consequence. Every choice had led to this moment. The room around him felt alive with presence, as though Master Dorje watched. Tenzin whispered, "Then I must go." He slipped the parchment into his robe and stood again. The air grew heavier, darker. As he turned to leave, a gust extinguished the altar flame. Cold silence fell. In that darkness, a memory surged. Master Dorje's final words: "You are not what you were. You are what you choose now." And so he chose to begin. Tenzin descended through a fractured stone tunnel, guided by the map and the pulse in his chest. The passage was tight, suffocating, walls etched with forgotten prayers. His fingers brushed the glyphs as he passed, feeling the power in them. Then, a sound. Wind, but not from behind. It came from ahead, as though the mountain itself breathed. He emerged into a vast underground space. Stone columns rose like trees, and at the center stood a sealed gate, marked again by the silver star. Tenzin approached, heart pounding. A bell tolled, not by hand, but by presence. It vibrated through the chamber, shaking dust from unseen heights. This is not just a place, he thought. It is a trial. The silence that followed felt watching. He dropped to his knees and bowed, not in surrender, but in reverence. He was no longer the boy who ran. And though he had not yet opened the gate, it had already begun to open something in him. Tenzin stood before the sealed gate, its cold stone pulsing with a strange warmth. He pressed his palm against the silver star symbol, and the surface glowed faintly, reacting to his touch. The chamber trembled, dust cascading from the unseen ceiling. A deep grinding sound echoed, and the gate split slightly, revealing a narrow opening. He stepped through into a corridor that curved downward, the air thick with age and forgotten incense. As he walked, visions flickered along the walls, ghostly echoes of monks in meditation, of chants that once filled the stone with life. "Is this memory or illusion?" he whispered. One monk turned and looked at him, then vanished into light. The corridor ended in a circular sanctum, its floor etched with symbols from the Eightfold Path. In the center lay a pool, still as glass. Tenzin knelt, his reflection rippling. But it wasn't his face. It was the boy he once was, eyes filled with hope. The silence spoke louder than truth. The younger reflection stared at Tenzin with calm clarity, untouched by regret. "You were not always broken," it seemed to say. Tenzin bowed his head, tears slipping down his cheeks. "I betrayed that boy," he muttered. The water stirred as if listening. A soft wind swept through the chamber, and a whisper filled the air. "To betray is to learn. To return is to choose." He lifted his head. The boy's reflection had vanished, replaced by a glowing lotus blooming within the water. Tenzin reached toward it, his fingers brushing the surface. At once visions engulfed him, moments of his past, the laughter of a brother lost in war, the cries of villagers during the raid, the silence of Dorje's final breath. Each image pierced him, not with pain, but with weight. "I carry them still," he realized. The lotus pulsed gently. He inhaled deeply. "Then I will carry them forward." In that moment, he accepted his past, not as a wound, but as a teacher. A stone path revealed itself beneath the water, leading to a chamber beyond the sanctum. Tenzin rose and followed. The air grew denser, charged with memory and tension. The chamber ahead opened into a gallery of murals, painted with a detail that defied time. He moved slowly, studying each wall. One mural showed a monk with the silver star embedded in his chest, casting light over a dark valley. Another showed that same monk falling, shadows consuming him. "Is this prophecy?" Tenzin wondered. A final mural stopped him cold. It was his face, drawn in bold ink, surrounded by fire and storm. "How did they know?" he whispered. At the center of the room lay a pedestal, upon it a crystal shard glowing softly. He approached, the light reflecting in his eyes. As his hand hovered above it, the crystal pulsed, then split into two, one light, one shadow. Tenzin stood frozen. The choice was not just to proceed, but who he would become. The two shards, one pale as moonlight, the other dark as obsidian, hovered above the pedestal. Tenzin reached out, breath shallow. The light shard pulsed gently, offering peace. The dark one shimmered with hidden fire, whispering power. One is liberation, he thought. The other, control. But what if both were illusions? He closed his eyes and listened. In the silence, Dorje's voice echoed again. "The star reflects, not gives." Tenzin withdrew his hand. "I seek not to take, but to see." The shards fused instantly into a single glowing orb, silver with flickering veins of dark and light. A test, he realized, not of desire, but of clarity. The orb floated upward, casting symbols onto the ceiling. One symbol, brighter than the rest, marked a passage behind the murals. He followed it, each step echoing with a resolve he hadn't known he possessed. He was no longer seeking the relic. He was becoming the question that only the relic could answer. Tenzin emerged from the passage into a garden hidden beneath the earth. Lush with moss, flowing water, and trees that should not bloom in such darkness, it radiated a living peace. The ceiling shimmered with a false sky, twilight locked in eternal bloom. He walked slowly, each step soft, reverent. Birds fluttered between branches, their song soft as breath. This was no illusion. It was balance. The garden, like the relic, was not made to be taken. It was meant to be understood. At the center stood a stone bench beside a still pond. Tenzin sat, his body aching, but his heart still. Across the water stood a child, himself again. But this time, the boy smiled. "You've come far," the boy said. "But you must still let go." Tenzin nodded. "I'm ready." The boy stepped back into mist. Leaves stirred. The pond rippled once, then stilled. And Tenzin, for the first time in years, breathed fully. The garden faded behind him as Tenzin entered a narrow corridor carved into the rock. Unlike the earlier paths, this one pulsed with heat. The air thickened with incense and ash. Faint chanting echoed from ahead, rhythmic and low, as though monks long dead still performed rites. Tenzin moved cautiously, each step heavier than the last. The corridor ended at a chamber of mirrors, dozens of them arranged in concentric circles. Each mirror reflected not just his form, but moments from his past. He saw himself shouting in rage, turning away from the wounded, stealing time for pride. "These are my truths," he whispered. Each reflection held him still, forcing him to relive what he had buried. But in the center of the room stood one mirror that showed nothing at all. A blank surface. Tenzin stepped toward it. As he approached, it shimmered. Instead of showing his face, it revealed the people he had harmed. They were not angry. They were waiting. He fell to his knees, breath breaking. The room tightened around him, the mirrors vibrating with low hums. Tenzin trembled, sweat forming despite the cold stone beneath him. From the blank mirror a voice, his voice, whispered, "Do you accept this?" He wanted to deny it, escape the images clawing at him. But denial had cost him everything before. "Yes," he whispered. "I was all of it." A brilliant flash burst from the central mirror. The reflections shattered like thin ice, each shard dissolving into light. Silence followed, absolute and still. In that silence Tenzin felt weight lift, not forgiven, but faced. The room was now bare. Where the mirrors stood, now stood doorways, each marked with a symbol: fear, desire, loss, doubt. Each led deeper. Tenzin closed his eyes. He stepped through the one marked fear. The darkness greeted him not as an enemy, but as a companion. "This is the way," he said, voice calm. The path to the silver star was no longer a search for light, but for the courage to stand in shadow. The tunnel narrowed, the air thinning. Tenzin's steps echoed with rhythmic resolve. Ahead, the flicker of a dim flame revealed a memory he had buried deep. The cave opened into a large hall, familiar and haunting. This was the monastery's inner sanctum, rebuilt by memory, not stone. There, standing beneath a flickering banner, was Khalsang, his younger brother. But Khalsang had died in the fire. The figure turned, smiling with the same softness Tenzin remembered. "You left me," the illusion whispered. Tenzin's breath caught. "I was afraid," he answered. The memory Khalsang stepped closer. "So was I, but you had the strength to return." Tenzin bowed, tears falling freely. The room pulsed with light, the walls trembling like fabric in wind. "You don't carry my death," Khalsang said. "You carry your life." With that, the illusion dissolved into smoke. Tenzin remained kneeling, the echo of love and guilt wrapped tight around him. He did not move. He did not need to. He understood. As the smoke cleared, The floor beneath Tenzin cracked and gave way, plunging him into a pit of darkness. He landed with a grunt in a cavern void of light. Panic surged, primal and fierce. His breath echoed, heartbeat thundering. But he remembered, fear was chosen. He inhaled and sat still, letting the darkness speak. In time it did. From the void emerged whispers, not voices but truths. You are not your shame. You are not your silence. You are not your escape. The air around him thickened, forming images, versions of himself twisted by rage, by vanity, by despair. He stood, faced them. You are me, he said, but I am more. The figures disintegrated into smoke. A faint light formed beneath his feet, expanding outward, forming a bridge of stone. The exit was visible at the far side. He walked across it slowly, not with triumph, but with peace. This was not conquest. This was surrender. And it was strength. Tenzin emerged into a chamber unlike any other, walls carved of crystal, refracting light into endless rainbows. The silver star was not an object. It was a presence. Suspended in midair was a silver sphere, pulsing with both darkness and light, like a heartbeat. He stepped forward, slowly, reverently. You're not what I imagined, he said aloud. No voice answered. It didn't need to. The sphere began to rotate, revealing scenes within it, villages burning, monks meditating, children laughing, armies marching. All of life. All of suffering. All of joy. Tenzin's hand hovered over it. I don't seek power, he whispered. Only understanding. The sphere stopped spinning. A narrow thread of light extended from it, touching his chest. It did not enter, it simply connected. In that moment, Tenzin saw not just his life, but every life. Not as separate, but as one. The silver star had never been hidden. It had only waited, for one who could see. The crystal chamber dimmed, and the silver star's light receded like a breath exhaled. Tenzin lowered his hand, feeling the connection dissolve, not vanish but integrate. The chamber trembled softly as a door opened behind him, carved not by tools but by time itself. He stepped through into a vast circular gallery. Along the walls stood statues, each of a monk, their hands in varied mudras, their faces serene, sorrowful, or stern. These were the guardians, the seekers who came before him. Tenzin moved between them, humbled. At the center of the gallery stood a mirror of polished obsidian, taller than a man. Within it, his reflection didn't mimic him. It moved on its own. It was the Tenzin who never returned, who chose power over presence, pride over peace. The reflection smirked. You still believe you're better? It asked. Tenzin didn't respond. He simply stepped forward. The reflection did the same. Two paths. One truth. The time to choose was no longer in the future. It was now. But the mirror shimmered, and the alternate Tenzin stepped through. Identical in form, opposite in essence. His robes darker, his eyes hard with judgment. You sought peace, the figure said. But peace is surrender. I chose control. Tenzin nodded. And what has it given you? The reflection smirked. Power, purpose, fear from others. Isn't that what you wanted? Tenzin inhaled slowly. I wanted freedom from myself. The figure lunged, their bodies clashing like thunder and wind. This was no physical battle. It was the collision of selves. Each strike echoed with memory. Guilt parried with acceptance. Anger collided with compassion. They fought across the gallery, among the statues, shadows dancing wildly. Finally, as the darker self raised a final blow, Tenzin did not block. He opened his arms. I accept you, he said. The shadow froze, blade mid-air shaking. Then, like mist in sunlight, it dissolved. Tenzin fell to his knees, exhausted. Not defeated, whole. The mirror cracked gently down the center. The cracked mirror reflected neither man now, only light, rippling gently, as if water had replaced glass. Tenzin stood slowly, the last tremors of the encounter fading from his breath. The statues bowed in unison, a miracle or symbol, he could not say. A final doorway appeared behind the mirror, veiled in golden light. He stepped through into a high mountain chamber open to the sky. Snow drifted lazily across the stone floor. A single tree bloomed in the center, its blossoms pink despite the chill. Beneath it sat an old man, blindfolded, ancient, still. "You have come far," the man said. His voice was not weak, but eternal. Tenzin bowed deeply. "I seek the meaning of the silver star." The old man smiled. "It is not something you find. It is something you become." He gestured to the tree. "This grew here not because of sunlight, but because something dared to bloom in the dark." Tenzin sat beside him. Silence fell. But it was not empty. It was whole. The old man turned his face skyward. "When I found the star, I too believed it would change the world. But it only changed me, and that changed the world." He removed his blindfold. Where eyes once were, now shimmered faint silver light. "You carry the seed," he said. "Will you plant it?" Tenzin looked down at his palms. The glow from the silver star, once external, now pulsed faintly beneath his skin. "I don't know how," he said honestly. "Then begin by listening," the man replied. A breeze moved through the chamber, scattering petals. Each petal shimmered like stardust. The tree dropped a blossom into Tenzin's lap. "The world does not need another master," the old man said. "It needs one who remembers." Tenzin closed his eyes, letting the wind and silence fill him. The star was not his burden. It was his practice. Not to wield, but to reflect. The old man faded into wind. The chamber, now empty, felt sacred still. The petals dissolved as Tenzin descended the mountain path, now lit by first light. No more chambers. No more trials. Only the wind, the stone, the quiet heartbeat of the world. As he walked, villagers emerged below, their homes still bearing the scars of long-ago raids. Some looked at him with suspicion. Others, with quiet curiosity. One child stepped forward and offered him a bowl of water. Tenzin accepted, bowed, and drank. He did not speak. He simply smiled. In that smile, there was no superiority, no promise, only presence. A woman whispered, "He's returned." Another replied, "He's different." And indeed he was. He did not come bearing miracles. He came bearing himself, transformed. The silver star still pulsed inside him, not as light, but as stillness. As the sun rose, Tenzin sat beneath a tree near the village, and closed his eyes. He was no longer the seeker. He was the path. And the path was enough. The village stirred gently as the morning unfolded. Tenzin remained beneath the tree, eyes closed, listening, not to sound, but to the silence beneath it. Birds called softly. A distant bell rang. He opened his eyes slowly, and a child sat beside him, mimicking his posture. "Are you a monk?" the child asked. Tenzin smiled gently. "Not yet." The child looked confused. "But you wear the robe." Tenzin said, "The robe is only cloth. A monk is someone who listens, who serves, who surrenders." The child nodded, not fully understanding, but satisfied. Others came. An old man with a limp, a woman with cracked hands, a youth hiding his grief. One by one, they sat around him. Tenzin said nothing. He offered no teaching. He was simply present. And in that stillness, something sacred grew. The village, once suspicious, now began to trust. Not because of miracles, but because of stillness. This was no return of a hero. This was the arrival of a listener. A woman approached, holding a bundle. Her son, eyes shut, burning with fever. "Please," she whispered, desperation cracking her voice. "Can you save him?" Tenzin looked down at the boy, heart aching. "I cannot promise healing," he said softly, "but I can be here." He dipped cloth into cool water and pressed it to the boy's brow. He whispered a mantra, not to fix, but to center. Others gathered in silence. The boy stirred faintly, breath easing. The woman sobbed, not in relief, but in release. Tenzin placed her hand on her son's chest. "Your touch matters more than mine," he said. "You are not alone." In that moment, Tenzin understood. He was no longer searching for the silver star. He had become its reflection. His presence calmed, not cured. His words steadied, not solved. And that was enough. The villagers saw not a mystic, but a mirror. In him they saw their pain made sacred, their wounds given witness. The boy's fever broke at twilight. Tenzin sat at the edge of the village, watching orange hues bleed into deep blue. The mountains were still. A young man sat beside him. "Why did you return?" he asked. Tenzin replied, "To stop running." The man looked down. "I want to leave this place. Start new. Far away." Tenzin smiled gently. "Sometimes new begins by staying, by being the one thing that doesn't run." The man grew silent. "But I'm afraid." Tenzin nodded. "So was I. Fear is not failure. It's a door." The wind stirred between them. No more was said. But the silence carried weight, and the young man left with slower, steadier steps. Tenzin remained alone, feeling the stillness deepen. In guiding others, he was not above them, but among them. No scripture had taught him this. Only silence, and loss, and return. The silver star glowed softly within his chest, not as power, but as peace that radiated gently outward. Night fell. Stars stretched across the sky like ancient prayers. Tenzin walked alone to the temple ruins near the village, now overgrown, but still sacred. He entered the broken gate, torch in hand. There he placed the fused lotus petal from the underground garden upon the altar. "Not to worship," he said, "but to remember." The ruins echoed his words. He sat before the altar, heart open. "Master Dorje," he whispered, "I'm ready now. Not for power, for presence." The wind answered in silence. But silence was no longer empty. The silver star pulsed faintly beneath his robe, not glowing, but alive. The temple did not need restoration. It only needed remembrance. As the torch burned low, Tenzin closed his eyes. Not in meditation. In surrender. Not in ambition. In devotion. For the first time he wasn't reaching. He was resting. The path had not ended. It had disappeared beneath his feet. He no longer needed to walk it. He had become it. As dawn approached, bells rang from the distant monastery towers, though no hands pulled the ropes. Tenzin looked up, standing in the ruined temple doorway. The sun crested the peaks, golden light washing the world clean. Behind him, the villagers stood in quiet formation. They had come not for answers, but for presence. And Tenzin offered none, only stillness. They began to chant softly. No one had taught them the words. They remembered them. And in that unity, the truth emerged. The silver star was not a relic nor a reward. It was the silence shared between souls. It was the moment a man stops running. It was the choice to stay. Tenzin stepped from the ruins and joined them, not as leader, not as savior, but as one of many. The chant grew louder, the light rising. A new day, not claimed, but welcomed. And above them on the mountain's peak, the silver star shimmered faintly, just for a moment, and then was gone. The days began to pass like flowing water, unforced, ungrasped. Tenzin remained in the village, not as a monk of sermons, but as one of soil, of service. He helped mend roofs, carried water from the stream, sat beside the dying without judgment. Children climbed trees and fell laughing. Elders taught him herbal cures forgotten by the world. In giving presence, he received wholeness. One evening, As firelight danced in the courtyard, a traveler arrived, cloaked in dust, eyes hungry with longing. He asked of the silver star. Tenzin did not answer. He only invited him to sit and eat. "Is it real?" the man asked. "If it is," Tenzin replied gently, "you are already on the path to it." The man grew silent, then nodded. It was not certainty that fed him, it was simplicity. In that stillness, the silver star echoed again, not in visions or voices, but in the shared warmth of rice and breath and unspoken truths. In time, the traveler chose to stay. Others came, and some left. But the village changed, not with temples or chants, but with attention. Gardens were planted where there were once stones. Songs returned to mouths once silent. The boy who had burned with fever now ran freely, carrying buckets as Tenzin once had. One night, a storm rolled in, fierce and loud. Roofs trembled. People gathered in the small temple space, huddled in fear. Tenzin stood among them, not as a shield, but as a root. "Breathe," he said softly. "Listen." Thunder cracked. Children cried. He did not silence them. He held them. He sang, softly, a mantra Dorje once taught him. The villagers joined. Together, they became calm. The storm passed, not with violence, but through it. The silver star had not spared them. But it had made them still. And sometimes, stillness was the only strength needed to weather a storm. After the storm, the village emerged not broken, but bonded. Trees bent by wind stood stronger. Tenzin walked through the soaked fields, hands muddy, sleeves rolled. He saw the young man who once wished to flee, now teaching children to read. He saw elders laughing with new wrinkles of joy. He sat by the stream, watching its endless flow. A child joined him. "Does the silver star still shine?" they asked. Tenzin pointed at the water. "There, I don't see it," the child said. Tenzin smiled. "You will, not with eyes, with stillness." The child dipped a hand into the stream. "It's cold, truth often is," he said. "But it moves us." The stream rushed over rocks, indifferent yet kind. Tenzin did not seek the relic now. He knew the truth. The star had never been lost. It had only waited, within each act of love, of labor, of quiet return. He no longer needed signs. He had become one. Seasons passed like breath. Tenzin aged, lines forming not from burden, but from blessing. His robe faded. His pace slowed. But his presence deepened. On the anniversary of his return, villagers gathered. There were no speeches. Only food, laughter, silent moments beneath lanterns. Tenzin stood briefly, holding a single candle. "To remember is not to return," he said. "It is to remain awake." That night, he walked alone to the mountaintop. Snow fell gently. The air thinned. He sat where the garden had once been. It was gone now, returned to stone. But he didn't mourn it. "Everything blooms, everything returns," he whispered. He looked up. The stars shimmered. Among them, one blinked brighter than the rest, just once. A final echo. He bowed, not to the sky, but to the journey. He understood now. What was sacred was not the destination, nor even the walk. It was the step taken with full heart. And in that, the star had fulfilled its vow. The next morning, the village woke to birdsong. Tenzin was not seen, but his robe lay folded neatly on the temple's threshold. Inside, the altar glowed faintly, not with magic, but memory. The villagers did not cry. They bowed. They carried forward. Children repeated his words like lullabies. Men and women sat under trees and simply listened. The wind moved gently through the fields, the same way he once did, without demand, but with presence. Far above, on the mountain's edge, a new flower bloomed in the snow. No one planted it. No one tended it. But it bloomed. The silver star was never a relic. It was a seed. And now, it lived in the soil, in silence, in story. Tenzin's journey had ended without ending. The monk who had run had returned. The man who sought power had become peace. The one who searched had become still. And in that stillness the world changed, not loudly, but forever. Time moved on, not with urgency, but with rhythm. The village thrived, not through wealth, but through presence. The temple stood not rebuilt, but rerouted. Children sat in circles beneath trees, telling stories of Tenzin, not as a saint, but as a man who listened. His name was not worship. It was remembered. A young girl stood where he once sat, eyes closed, in stillness. She had never met him, but she knew his silence. The elders shared seeds he had planted. The traveler who once came for the star now taught meditation to anyone who asked. No relic was ever found. And yet it was everywhere. In the kindness between strangers, in shared meals, in the breath taken before anger. Tenzin had not left teachings carved in stone. He had lived them. And the village once forgotten had become a sanctuary, not through magic, but through memory. And so, the star continued, not in the sky, but in the soil. Far beyond the village, in another land scorched by war and sorrow, a monk arrived, bearing no name. He carried no staff, no scroll, only silence. People scoffed at first. But when he knelt beside the wounded and shared their breath, they paused. When he built shelter without words, they helped. When he listened, they spoke. The monk never spoke of the silver star, but his stillness bore its light. One evening, a child asked him, "Are you from the mountain?" He smiled gently and said, "We are all from somewhere sacred." Word of his presence spread, not as myth, but as warmth. In places where peace was a rumor, he became its echo. No one ever knew his past, but in him they felt something ancient and true. The silver star had not ended. It had begun to walk, quietly, humbly, from one soul to another. The light was no longer singular. It was seated. And everywhere it bloomed, suffering bowed. In the monastery high above the clouds, where Tenzin first broke, and then bloomed, a new generation of seekers gathered. The ruins were never rebuilt. They remained as they were, scarred, sacred, silent. But now they were filled with life. Young monks swept the stone paths, not to cleanse, but to connect. They whispered his name in morning chants, not to summon, but to remember. On the altar lay no idol, only a bowl of water, clear, still, undisturbed. It reflected the sky, the wind, the one who looked upon it. This was the final teaching, to reflect, not impose. To hold, not grasp. To surrender, not escape. The monastery was not made holy by relics, but by return. Each stone held the memory of a footstep taken not in power, but in peace. And in that silence, Tenzin remained, not as spirit or legend, but as a way of walking. And those who came after followed, not behind, but beside. Somewhere, beneath the snow and stone of the highest ridge, a flower still bloomed. It needed no witness. It asked for no praise. It simply existed, radiant and undisturbed. A bird landed beside it, drank from the melted snow pooled in its petals, and flew on. The world turned. Clouds moved. Mountains stood. And beneath it all, the silver star pulsed, not as object, not as destination, but as essence. It was never lost. It had always been waiting, for a heart brave enough to stop searching. For hands steady enough to hold silence. For feet willing to walk, not to reach, but to remain. And in that stillness, the world breathed. No monument marked its truth. No temple captured its meaning. It was a whisper across time, a presence in soil, a heartbeat beneath stone. And so, it continued, quiet, radiant, unseen, and utterly alive. A voice, soft and ancient, spoke over the wind, not from a person, but from the silence itself. You who have walked this far know this, there is no ending, only returning. The screen of life faded to soft white. Tenzin's final breath echoed not with sorrow, but with surrender. No one witnessed it, and yet it echoed in every hand that held kindness, in every pause before anger. In every moment someone chose to listen instead of speak. The silver star was never a path to be followed. It was a stillness to be remembered, a reflection to be found in one's own eyes. And as the story closed, it did not end. It bowed to suffering, to silence, to seekers, to soil, to stars, and to you, the one who listened long enough to remember what was never forgotten. The secret of the silver star was never a secret. It was the truth we already carried, waiting, always, to be still.